All right, moms and dads, on this episode of the Experience Miracles podcast, I am thrilled to sit down and interview Allie Miller, a registered dietitian with a contagious passion and so much experience when it comes to using food and nutrients to help heal the body. And her expertise has been featured all over the place, from Oprah Magazine, MindBodyGreen, Women's Health, and then she's all over Instagram, podcasts. She has written multiple books, and they have another one coming out that I think is just going to be so life-changing for your family. And it's just a message that you will not want to miss. Listen all the way to the end of this one, the adrenal conversation and the adrenal reset and nervous system conversation, using both of our expertise really is going to land for so many of you moms who are just exhausted. It just have tried everything to fix your hormones and your adrenals for you and your kids. Like, listen all the way to that. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. Well, thank you for your time. I know you guys are, we'll just get rolling because my first question has to do with that, and we'll have some fun. I get so excited about these interviews, especially when rockstar Dr. Morgan gives me this whole, what we call run sheet and all the things we could talk about. And speaking of adrenals, which is what I want to talk about the whole time, and nervous system stress and adrenals, my adrenals go up and down when I prepare for these because I'm so excited. It's like happy little adrenal glands. And then it's like, do you think we can talk for 3 hours? Because I love this stuff so much. So come on, adrenals, get ready to go. Hang with me. And then the other thing, getting ready for this, I saw you guys, you have 451 podcast episodes, I think, already put out there.
Something like, I think we just recorded 420, so I think we're 400 and something.
400,
yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it's 415 you saw a couple.
Right, that could be. And so my excitement, just being personal for a second as we kick this off, I was like, okay, they've done 400 plus episodes and they still have their adrenals. There's hope for me in this new podcast world that's out there.
Yeah.
So
You've got it.
Well, thank you for jumping on. Thank you for the content that you guys crank. I love being a lifelong just health nut. And specifically, we are excited to have you guys on our podcast because we love to talk about the nervous system. And we love to talk about not just, all the components of health and wellness, because that's a ton of different episodes and a ton of different concepts. But we really love coming back to stress, coming back to the nervous system. And sometimes it's the stuff that is right in front of us, the most obvious of stuff, like stress and like sleep and like that core operating system of our body, the nervous system, the HPA axis and the adrenals. Sometimes when we fall in love with health and wellness, we almost get caught up in the details and we miss the basics, which is where 80% of healing comes from, 80% of health comes from, and I might be a little low on that number, honestly. And so really love your content, Allie. Was there something that really set you guys on this path to create such practicality to your content, I would almost ask?
So, just to kind of clarify for listeners, so when you say you guys, Naturally Nourished is my brand, and I have a co-clinician and podcast co-host, Becky Yu, who is going to be publishing as a co-author of Naturally Nourished Kids. But Naturally Nourished, I started in 2013, and it is a functional medicine clinic. And I wrote the anti-anxiety diet and the anti-anxiety diet cookbook independently. When I launched this functional medicine clinic and brand, the antithesis or driving force was food as medicine. I've always been really passionate about the role of food and nutrition. I was a dance major initially in college and quickly shifted into all of the locavore movement at my university and started to frequent farmers markets. This shifted me into making a wrong turn in my wellness journey of becoming a vegetarian and then vegan. And I went to Bastyr University, which is a naturopathic college of medicine, because I believed that being a raw vegan was the way to heal the body, go figure. And when I was out there and I started to learn about things like leaky gut, and I started to learn about autoimmune conditions, and I myself started to experience for the first time ever at age 21, 22, panic attacks. I realized very quickly that what I perceived as this optimal diet was really driving a lot of nutritional deficiency, was creating total havoc on my gut. And I came up with one of my really strong mantras or principles that I use in my book, The Anti-Anxiety Diet, that doctrine creates disconnect. And I love that as a practitioner, because I think that we can get really passionate about a module on detox, or passionate about hormones or this and that. And it's like you can, as a human also, when you're listening to influencers and excited about something that's changed favorably in your life, we have to be mindful that we are evolving beings. There is changes in seasons. There are changes of hormone fluctuations. There are changes of stress loads. You know, this entire epigenome beyond the nutritional factor, changes of environment with mold toxicity potentially, or other volatile compounds in our work environment, et cetera. All of this input is constantly evolving what quote unquote optimal is. And so when I take a very practical approach with food as medicine, with my patients, with my brand, in my clinic, it always has that N=1 individualized element to it. And I'm always very quick to state, you know, hey, don't demonize broccoli. Don't demonize this or that. This is where it works well for an individual. Based on this, we need to consider some anti-nutrients. We might need to consider also where someone else would thrive, having that hormetic stressor maybe to actually stimulate glutathione synthesis, let's say, for instance. So I love getting nerdy. I'm all about biochemistry in the world of nutrition and nutritional supplementation. And yet, even with my supplement line of 47 different products of the Naturally Nourished line, I can't say that there's one best formula. I can't say that there's one superfood for someone, because we are so individualized, and even what works for us in one season, 3 years down the line, might not be optimal for us. And when we get stagnant and we don't see outcomes, it's because the body is constantly evolving and changing.
So many, the majority of clinicians seeing patients one-on-one and brands making content and podcasts and books, they just cookie cutter everything. Chiropractors cookie cutter everything. And so the toughest thing to do clinically is the best thing to do, which is to slow down and individualize and personalize the heck out of your recommendations. So as you steer your patients and your clients and your community down that road, how do you help them get excited to have customized, personalized, individualized care, but also not get overwhelmed, I guess I would say, you know, because it'd be a lot easier if everybody could just follow the same diet, the same cookbook. How do you walk that line of making sure that people can get down this road and not feel overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, that's where using labs, functional labs, can be really helpful to drive the course, if you will, because, you know, we love to say test, don't guess. And I see all too often in the functional medicine and natural medicine space that we can get just as algorithmic as conventional doctors can, where it's like, okay, here's hyperlipidemia, give them a statin. Same type of thing, where we can see similar approaches in the you know, versus allopathic in the naturopathic world, where I see this problem, here's the solution. But really what the goal of the way that we practice is supposed to be is to ask why it's happening in the first place, not what to do about it first. And so I think when we ask why, there's always going to be a unique antecedent or trigger or driving force, and that a good practitioner will take time to really understand how to support that upstream while they're working the downstream, potentially algorithmic elements, right? Like anyone that has elevated triglycerides is going to be recommended an omega-3 fatty acid, right? I'm also going to work with assessing their fasting insulin levels and maybe putting a CGM on them to look at how they're metabolizing glucose and where their carbs are at. But with that being said, often there's a part of people beyond carbs, beyond sugar, that stress alone could be driving up their A1C or driving that dysglycemia because of the glucagon connection to stress and because of the fact that cortisol is a glucocorticoid. And so, we can't, and for some people to take that step further, right? For some people, they'll actually get better glycemic balance by liberating their carbs versus further restricting, which is why we can't just say low, 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 the better. And so I think it's important that we have centralized themes. I have a couple kind of grounding hypotheses, if you will, about optimal wellness that I kind of overlap in the way that I practice and the way that I work with my patients. One is that stress is the Achilles heel to wellness. If you don't manage the HPA axis, there's going to be a whack-a-mole situation of disease and dysfunction, and you're just dancing from organ system to system and watching what's going to burn out next. The other is that I do believe we all are designed as hybrid machines, in the sense that, I don't like the word machine with everything AI, I guess. We were designed as beautiful hybrid beings, and the fact that many Americans and just individuals with industrialized impact on the food system have lost the access to using ketones as fuel, and we were all designed by God to actually use ketones in times of food scarcity, in survival, in utero with development. And I believe it's such a lower oxidizing fuel source, such a powerful neurological tool that everyone should have access to it. Depending on how high we need to get our ketones might be varied, but we should all have access. And then the third kind of big overlapping tenet I have is that I do believe we all were designed to be omnivores. Now, again, how meat heavy versus how plant heavy an individual could be variations of the spectrum. But when I have people ask me, hey, I read the anti-anxiety diet, can I do a modified vegan or vegetarian approach to this? I say you can, but you'll be missing out on your choline, which supports acetylcholine, as you read about in chapter 7 on rebalancing your neurotransmitters. And that's kind of a big deal. And yes, you can supplement with phosphatidylcholine, but why not start with food first? And on the other hand of the spectrum, I kind of alluded to, there's a lot of, I think, shock and awe in the food influencer world, especially with male influencers and the carnivore movement. On the anti-nutrients and fear associated with plant consumption. And I often, of course, if someone's having a flare of Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, I'm going to rest their gut from plants and anti-nutrients and do a bone broth fast and nourish them with animal product. And then it will stay predominant animal product. But I want to actually give them those phytocompounds that support microbial balance in their gut. I want to give them that, as I said, hormetic stressor of those anti-nutrients so their body can actually synthesize and make more antioxidants by that stimulus. And so I think, again, when we get kind of myopic on one side or the other, those are kind of the three areas that I think need to kind of enter the conversation of optimizing in the human body. And then how we adjust the dials is going to be varied. And that could vary for the same individual with different season.
So, all right, keto, clean. I caught that word. You said the way keto, and I'll run it through my Tony Farmer lens here, buddy, but, keto burns clean. So the reason that diet, many reasons, but this is the one I want to pull the thread on, that diet is proven to be very helpful for seizure patients is any extra oxidative, metabolic, neurological stress to a seizure patient is known to trigger a seizure. So they're already operating with nervous system dysfunction. Their sympathetic nervous system is already at rest, never at rest. It's always wound up. It's always tense. And so that's why weather changes. That's why stressful events. That's why keto can minimize seizure presentation. And I've never used the word clean, but I actually learned something that I think I kind of knew, but now I know better. That is one of the cleanest forms of creating energy for the body, right? Is going through in that process. So that is why for seizures, it's an effective path. So,
and I mean, similar mechanisms, I'll go a little further with that, similar mechanisms to why also it is used as a foundation for autonomic nervous system regulation in the world of panic attacks, anxiety, bipolar disorder, manic depressive disorder, keep going, right? It is because ketones cross the blood-brain barrier, right? And so when they cross the blood-brain barrier, they do a couple of things. In the world of clean fuel, they fuel the mitochondria as the most efficient fuel source, putting out the least amount of oxidative stress. So oxidative stress drives inflammation in the body, right? So the brain and intracranial space is already in a less inflamed state when ketones cross that blood-brain barrier. We also know that ketones are GABAergogenic, meaning that they upregulate the expression of GABA. GABA is a neuroinhibitory compound. I think that in the world of neurotransmitters, serotonin is probably the most popular, if you will, or the most known. Dopamine is kind of on its heels, maybe, especially with all of the tech world and dopamine detox and reset talk. But GABA is such an unsung hero in the world of mental emotional regulation and also in neurological health. So GABA itself, as I called, is a neuroinhibitory compound and in a AKA mellower outer for the brain and the mood. But what's lovely is it's non-sedative, so it mellows out, it kind of vents the steam train of epinephrine or adrenaline response in the body. So that locking that we experience or that surging that we experience, GABA helps to mellow out, yet it still supports, we see in research, academic performance, concentration and focus. They look at basketball players that are shooting free throws, and when they're in the zone, GABA is elevated in the brain. And so I love it as a powerful tool, and I love to help to support GABA regulation, which can be done through the brain-gut axis with the microbiome. Also can be done through keto, which upregulates GABA expression. And then I even use bioidentical GABA chews in my clinic as a great tool. Generally, if I'm like on stage. So today I didn't take GABA Calm. Yesterday, my 8-year-old daughter was in a play and she cried the night before because she was stressed about her lines. She had 27 lines to memorize, and she self-advocates. She said, "Can I have a GABA Calm before my performance?" And it's like, yeah, girl, because you get it. Because it just that sense of she can be in her zone without that excitatory, anticipatory stress messing with the hustle, right?
Yeah. 27 lines. I think I'd have taken one in my pocket on stage with 27 lines for sure, I mean,
anytime I'm on stage with bright lights and a microphone, I take GABA Calm because, again, the adrenaline of loving my job, of performing, of wanting to show up, I still want to look cool as a cucumber and not have that little tremor of that adrenaline stress response that I would otherwise get for a big performance type of thing. So GABA is a lovely reason, harnessing back to the keto. So there's the lower oxidative stress, supports the mitochondria, GABAergogenic, and then also we see that ketones support BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we see better neuroplasticity, we see better neurological function in general when there is BHB in a measurable level, or beta hydroxybutyrate ketone bodies on a measurable level in human. So for all of those various reasons, I'm a big proponent, again, of everyone having the access and ability to tap into ketones, because I think we just operate better and we operate more balanced and we have more cognitive clarity and mood stability.
Yeah, in every way. It is. It's one of those things that you can take down so many positive roads, right? And then you apply it to today's world that we know we all live in, that we know our kids live in, which is just, yes, it's over toxic. Yes, there's too many chemicals. And so I want to come back to, I just love you the more you check, because whack-a-mole is actually, I use this analogy all the time. And that was the other thing that caught my ears there is when you get... Medicine does this, and again, I'm kind of coming back to the same chorus here, meaning I have always found that when you get over to the natural, the root cause healing side, what we will often say in contrast, and I'm always careful not to bash because there's life-saving to every intervention, and in contrasting with our approach, really getting into functional, integrative nervous system healing, right, and getting into the weeds with it, what you don't want to do is just cookie cutter everything, but also on the medical side, conventional medical side, we get frustrated that that doctor only works works with that system, and that doctor only works with that system. And so you end up with this whack-a-mole of specialists and providers, and nobody's talking to the whole body. Nobody's talking to the nervous system. Nobody's talking to the different, or working with these different axes that connect everything together. But now, and I don't love the word but, because again, that's always like, I teach my kids, like, you're not supposed to start a sentence with the word but or well, because you're just about to make an excuse, right? But there we go. And so then you get into natural health, and I'm like, well, we're just chasing this system with a supplement. We're just chasing this system with an essential oil. We're just chasing this system with it. So again, what I love about the way you guys really work is you really do the work that it takes to say, okay, there's something that really tethers these all together. And so we don't want to just play natural health whack-a-mole either. And this system burns out, so we'll just support it. And then this system burns out. And also what is very chiropractic here, Ali, is there's a difference of supporting whether we talk about the system, the central autonomic nervous system is our home base, right? So let's you and I go there next. And then the central and autonomic nervous system, they very much fully rely on the gut and the immune system and the motor system and the endocrine system and all these systems. So what I find is even my most naturally inclined patients nowadays are coming in, and they're myopic into the gut, the immune, the endocrine, and those become their goals. And there's a layer even more foundationally to that, with stress being the Achilles heel of healing and being healthy. And so let's go all the way down to that, which is for you and I, it's the foundational layer, but actually for so many patients today, not just when they've exhausted conventional medicine, they feel like they've already exhausted integrative holistic medicine. And wild enough for us to say, but nobody's talked to them about their nervous system burnout. Nobody's talked to them about, because there's sympathetic stress, there's sympathetic fight or flight overdrive, which is your colicky baby and your melting down toddler. Most of my patients today, and you're going to know this inside now, it's changed, even from 10 to 15 years ago. And this includes kids. And I wish it didn't, but I have to say what is. Most of my patients have gone off of the sympathetic cliff, and their sympathetics are shut down. Their parasympathetics are shut down. Their adrenals packed up a carry-on bag and moved to Mexico many, many months and years ago, and they are just toast. So give us the basics, or give us the right amount of adrenal fatigue, HPA access, and then let it cook. Just go after it. How essential and foundational is the stress conversation, the adrenal conversation, to the gut conversation, immune system conversation, and every other conversation?
Yeah. So, just kind of in my quick punchy breakdown of the HPA axis. So, we're talking about the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the brain, and then the adrenal glands that sit above the kidneys. And that autonomic nervous system, like you said, is either in sympathetic fight or flight or parasympathetic, which I am really sad that parasympathetic was taught to us and still is as just rest and digest, because it truly is regulation function of the body.
Real quick. Let me sneak this in. You'll love this. And I know you guys create content, so we have an amazing team of writers. And then, hey, it's 2024, so we're using Claude and ChatGPT to try and help make more content. I just sent my writing team this week on Monday. I said, if this describes parasympathetic as rest and digest only, retrain these robots to say regulation. I literally just sent that Slack message. Yeah. I'm like, it is the regulation side of the system. So carry on. Thank you.
No doubt. Because I think that people don't see the importance of the parasympathetic balance in the body. And so, if we kind of break down the hypothalamic and pituitary roles, the hypothalamus is what regulates our body's overall balance, right? Our homeostasis, right? And so when we look at what goes on there, we're going to see huge influence on body temperature regulation. We're going to see huge influence on growth hormone already, which is further really hit in the pituitary world, but we're seeing growth hormone and sexual hormone stimulus there. We're seeing thyroid releasing hormones. So we're starting to see metabolic health being hit here. We're seeing sleep and wake patterns. We're seeing leptin targeting the hypothalamus, which is such an important, not just satiety signal for the body, but leptin is a safety signal for the body. So when we see teens with hypothalamic amenorrhea, for instance, right, or loss of menstrual cycle because of disordered eating or overcaloric restriction, it's because that hypothalamus didn't get that leptin dinging saying that we're safe, we're satiated, we're fed. It's a food scarcity response, which then stimulates the pituitary to suppress sex hormone as a survival mechanism, right? So we look at body temperature, we look at sleep patterns, we look at energy, we look at metabolism, all having a really big role. And then when we pass that over to the pituitary, I think that that's maybe a little bit more of a known star of the show, where we'll see, you know, our FSH and LH in the world of women's hormones regulated. We're going to see oxytocin regulated in the pituitary, which for babies and moms and all humans alike, you know, I mean, this is the bliss factor. This is what I think God gave us, oxytocin, because it helps us to feel safe. It helps us to feel loved. It helps us to feel connected and trust. It's such a powerful anxiolytic compound, and is released at times of touch, connection, safety, right?
It's our cheat code as chiropractors, because we use physical touch. So there's all sorts of neurophysiological mechanisms we can trace through proprioception versus, you know, into the sensory, into the cerebellum, through to the hypothalamus. You know, we can map that out. But that is one of the I grew up in the Nintendo age, so I love to use the analogy of cheat code. That's our cheat code. You know, it really is.
I love that. And I mean, just to take a quick sidebar on that, because I don't want to forget, in the world of touch, during the bad season, which is what I call pandemic, because I don't like using the targeted name that billions of dollars have already funded. But during the bad season, when I had patients that were really not doing well, they were a lot of my single male and females in their 20s through 40s, basically. And my number one recommendation to them was get at least a bi-weekly chiropractic acupuncture or massage, because you need to be touched by someone. Yes. And the secondary was, can you adopt an animal? And I mean, wild to the point that I have this genius client, you know, MIT, truly actually rocket scientist, right? And he was wearing a CGM because he was having just a lot of dysautonomia. And I thought, you know, let's look into the blood sugar story here. And his blood sugar was the most stable when he, during the bad season, was taking ballroom dancing classes. And it wasn't the exercise, it was the touch with a partner. The fact that he wasn't isolated and he had that oxytocin connection to feel safe. And I think that that's just so powerful for listeners to hear and understand, because we were designed to be communal beings. And, you know, that whole 6 feet of separation disrupts our electromagnetic field. That's about as far as an EKG can measure the heart output as an electric charge from the human to be. And I think that created just so much dysautonomia, autonomic nervous system dysregulation because of that oxytocin connection. So
just nailed it. We went into that. Yes, I love that term for it. We went into it with the highest level of dysautonomia ever, which is why we were more susceptible to it, and then it made it worse, which is why it's sticking around for so many, because so many have not had that root cause of dysautonomia handled yet. They are literally physically still stuck in this sympathetic, you know, access burnout loop, and you know, sometimes it's honestly a physical mechanism that must hit reset, which is something the way I've always taught it, and I'm a nerd who then teaches in like super Iowa farmer terminology. So I have a question I want to ask you live as we go through this about how I was taught something with an adrenal reset that we'll come back to. But I also snuck that touch thing into you as you were really going through that. So back to the HPA axis and the hypothalamus. Yeah, I love this. Can we make this a Rogan podcast where we go 3 hours? The other thing, the run sheet always says like 45 to 60 minutes. And I'm like, no, I get it.
So sex hormone, oxytocin, we see, of course, thyroid stimulating hormone, which a lot of people don't know when their doctor runs their thyroid, that they're only looking at a pituitary feedback, not the actual functional output of their thyroid gland. So we see, again, metabolic, sexual hormone, reproductive, reproductive health. We see, of course, adrenal stimulus in both the hypothalamus and the pituitary, so ACTH coming from the pituitary. And then when we get down to the adrenals play a big role. Of course, the medulla and the cortex, we'll nerd out a little bit on them structurally. So the medulla is where we're going to make our neurotransmitters of the adrenals, the catecholamines. So this is our dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And catecholamines are basically stress-responding neurotransmitters, stimulus-responding neurotransmitters, if you will. Dopamine we think of as that bliss-reward-seeking factor. And when we look at blue light and its impact on dopamine, that can over time really deplete dopamine levels. We see, of course, video gamers or those on tech that especially get other rewards, or social media is a really good example where we get a different reward mechanism plus the blue light that can really have extreme dopamine influence. We see norepinephrine and epinephrine playing a big role, where epinephrine, is layman's terms adrenaline, and some individuals that run too high are more prone towards fight or flight surge, more pain sensitivity, panic, undesirable feelings of stress or overwhelm, and norepinephrine is supposed to counterpart that. Too little of vitamin C can interfere with how dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine convert back and forth. And if the adrenals are insufficient or burned out, we might see low across the board, or we might see low in the epinephrine and norepinephrine, and maybe dopamine is still moderate, depends on the individual. In the cortex is where we make the steroidal hormones. And so this is where we make cortisol, which is kind of the star of the stress story. Cortisol, just like anything, again, you can't demonize it and you can't make it a hero. It has its role, and everything has its perfect balance in the body. And, too little cortisol can drive chronic fatigue, systemic inflammation. We can see also more immune susceptibility of severe infection if cortisol is chronically low. But I think the big experiential hit is usually chronic pain, inflammation, and fatigue, and then brain fog, etc.
What about in kids? What about and I might be a little early in my run here, but two analogies I use 24/7 in the clinic here, Ali, is the whack-a-mole. Like, hey, we're not just going to chase symptoms, and let's also not chase systems. Not yet, anyways. Let's get the master control system. Let's get the autonomic nervous system. Let's get the central nervous system. Let's get your brain and body communicating and regulating. Like I say that 24/7. So that's our home base. The other analogy I find myself using all the time is the roller coaster. Because honestly, you can simplify this and then advance it. Like, life is a roller coaster. Our stressors, our life has all sorts of roller coaster-ish to it. And then second, neurodevelopment in a child is completely nonlinear. On a poster, it looks linear. Motor milestones look linear. Everything looks linear. God did not design our kids' nervous systems with a poster. Okay, he could craft an infographic that none of us, even you and I, would be like, oh man, I don't know if I could pick that one up. Right? We'd love to see it, by the way, wouldn't we? Right? The original design. Yeah, but so it's not linear. It's very roller coastery. And then kids got sick. And they went through this storm, and so now they have to heal, and that has a path that is very roller coastery to it. So, what are the number one, and you can go adults and then kids, or put them all together. What pushes someone's adrenals, and AKA nervous system, therefore, so far over the cliff that they would go low cortisol? Because not that many people talk about low cortisol. Everybody wants to talk about, the too much of things. Right. But you're right there with the too little of things. If you had to aggregate it and pick the most common offenders, what would cause someone to go that far down this axis to burnout? Well, the most
common one I see with kids is the use of steroids. So often it's respiratory dysfunction that put them on excessive steroids, and that burns out the adrenals over time. And often these kiddos are dealing with growth delays because, again, that whole pathway is because the pituitary isn't worried about growth hormone. It's worried about stimulating those tired adrenals because the feedback mechanism is broken. And meanwhile, they've gone to sleep because they're relying on the exogenous steroid from the inhalers. And I have many kiddos and teens that are in that neighborhood. Less frequent that I see, but I know occurs, and it's probably, unfortunately to say this, but true, because I am a cash-based practice, I don't see those that are CPS kids or in the system or foster care or, God forbid, have been homeless or have had, some serious household trauma. But of course, trauma and stress is a huge role on the adrenal insufficiency, and it's a survival mechanism of burnout, essentially. And then I would also add to it silent chronic infections. And so this is where we can look into areas like Lyme disease, mold toxicity, Epstein-Barr, mono, these types of things that are chronically driving inflammation. And so the corticosteroid stimulus is trying to regulate that. Usually those individuals also tend to have a little bit more mental, emotional stress. So they might be kind of burning that and not regulating and getting back into that parasympathetic balance. And I would say with adults and teens, the other area that is very common as a medically induced or medication induced influence is Adderall and the world of stimulant medications, because we are just jacking up their HPA axis and their adrenal feedback by giving them methamphetamine, essentially speed, as various names of drugs and metabolites of said compound. And that is constantly keeping that surveillance system in survival mode. It does not allow the body to feel safe, which is why often appetite is dysregulated. So ChatGPT would like that dumbed down rest and digest mode there. But the fact that that's the number one side effect of the drug tells you that you're driving dysfunction of the parasympathetic space. And I think that's a big one that we see. And it's just so dang unfortunate that we are prescribing these drugs. I mean, we're prescribing SSRIs and the whole Adderall, Ritalin suite of stimulants at age 4 or earlier even, we're seeing now in America, which is just shocking.
My friend, I'd much rather just leave this one in silence, but we're here. So we have an intensive program at our office, so we're outside Chicago, and then my specialty is the perfect storm, which is the whole story of dysregulation, subluxation, sympathetic dominance, dysautonomia, and in its early form, dysautonomia and my neurological scientific story here really just went to sympathetic dominance and parasympathetic, suppression. I never 5 to 10 years ago had conversations with my patients or community or anything about just flat out exhaustion, and that's why I'm here. This is where we are now, especially post C word, right, and all that. So, anyways, thank you for and so in that. Our latest patients, honestly, are coming from all over the place and are. I'm just dancing away from this because I don't want to say it out loud. So my squirrel brain is protecting my emotions. Last month, took on a 2-year-old on 3 different psychotropic medications because she went into regressive autism because she has the perfect storm on steroids. Now, you may think, because I'm the king of analogies, that I just said on steroids, meaning extra. No, literally, this kiddo was an induction birth. And so what induction birth does is it actually short circuits the neurobiomechanical respiratory. So C-section birth does this, fast birth does this. So chiropractically, we talk all about the upper cervical with birth interventions, but the thoracics. So the upper thoracics, the middle thoracics, and the lower thoracics, and what we really refer to as these neurotransitional zones, they are essential to endocrine function, digestive function, and respiratory, diaphragmatic function. And oxidation is the number one most important nutrient to the brain. The brain gets most pissed, literally by quantity, and the fastest ticked by speed when it's low on oxygen. There's a gut-brain connection, don't get me wrong, but there's a physical connection to the brain first, proprioception and tension. Then there's an oxidative CSF duro connection. Those go fast. The gut goes slow, so I'm not taking gut out of it, but those go fast. So when a brain, especially a brand new brain, a plastic brain, gets these interventions, gets these things. So this little girl here, Allie, it was a high stress pregnancy, so we're already, starting down the road. Then there was an induction birth, and what I find all the time is my induction birth kiddos struggle to breathe and move the ear, nose, throat, lymphatics. They are, Iowa farmer language, poor plumbers. They can't kick an infection. They can't kick mucus through, because the way God designed us is, yes, we have all this advanced biochemistry in our body, but we also kind of have really simple / advanced biomechanics. We're supposed to move stuff through to get it out. We trap the bad guys in mucus, we get them out. We trap the bad things, in the gut, and we get it out. So this kid couldn't get anything out. So she's building, what does medicine say? Oh, it's totally normal. You're colicky, totally normal chronic ear infections, totally normal strep and RSV and croup. So they loaded this kid up on inhalers and nebulizers. So when I take a case history, the path to anxiety in a child is induction and inhalers. And that is what I see so often. And I'm so glad you went there. And I'm triple tapping on this, because rightfully so, we're raging against the machine with antibiotics, destroying the gut, serotonin, dopamine, ADHD. There's a huge connection to the overuse of antibiotics and, anxiety and autism and ADHD. But I don't find many people talking about these son of a gun steroids. And they throw a child's neurochemistry developmental system off, and the adrenals pick up on it, get, pardon my French, pissed off by it. Mm-hmm. And it's those kids that go into severe anxiety. I mean the word severe, real early, real often, and I'll be done with my right here, which also means they reach exhaustion or regression earlier in life. Like, I never saw an exhausted patient, like total burnout. I didn't see them until they were teens. And then their case history was awful, right? It was epigenetics. It was high stress pregnancy, labor and delivery. They were sick. Everything the pediatrician said they were going to grow out of, they didn't. They grew into challenges, but it wasn't bad enough to raise the red flag on another diagnosis, right? So then they would reach anxiety, and then they would reach exhaustion. And Allie, I see 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds now who have, and we measure this with HRV and thermography and everything else. So again, back to, we test this. We're not just tracing symptoms. I see more neurological exhaustion and full-on depletion in clinic than ever before. So what I'd love to do here in our last section of this is, if we know that so many of us and our kids and families are there, and we start to identify the things that get us there, let's talk to the community and the families that are already there in terms of what we do to get them to reset, recharge, get back to regulation. What are your first moves? Somebody's there. Somebody, like, clinically, they have gone to that neurological exhaustion state, adrenal fatigue, burnout. What are the first main moves, first cards to play?
Well, I like to always test also their DHEA, because especially for kiddos, I mean, DHEA also is steroidal, made in the cortex of the adrenal gland, as is aldosterone, but I won't nerd out on that one too much. Increased thirst can occur, of course, as a sign of adrenal insufficiency. But in the world of DHEA, this is a precursor to estrogen and testosterone. It plays a role with metabolic health, muscle retention and gain. Also has somewhat of like a stem cell response in our central nervous system in our brain, so very anti-inflammatory as well. And at any age, they don't really have reference ranges for DHEA levels prior to adults. There are some teen levels, depending on where you're looking at your references, but I have not seen references for children. But with that being said, if we'd like to look where they're falling and see if DHEA supplementation would be warranted. Often it is. And then I also would use adrenal glandular, so bovine adrenal gland, just like we would use nature-throid in someone as opposed to synthroid potentially, or levothyroxine. We're giving the gland from an animal to give exogenous compound, but in a more wholesome delivery than a synthetic that's targeted at one metabolic pathway. And so adrenal bovine glandular compound would be highly recommended, and we look at B6 as a nutrient of focus and vitamin C. These are big kind of targeted nutritional areas. And then I'm a huge proponent of breath work as far as one of the best ways that we can harness the HPA axis. I use the 4-7-8 breath work in the anti-anxiety diet, which Dr. Andrew Weil, I believe, coined. And that's the in for 4, holding for 7, and then exhaling for 8 with a whoosh, kind of pursed lips whoosh. And you think of that as like compressing the air out of tires, if you will, or an inner tube kind of thing. And that double exhale to inhale does support vagus nerve recalibration to get you into a parasympathetic space. Has been shown through research to be quite effective. Just a couple cycles of that. I have a YouTube video showing people how to do it because I think it's just such a powerful tool. And that goes home as a link with anyone. And we try to do it also in clinic, but I send that home as something to incorporate. And I always say, breath work has to be used proactively, just like lifting weights to build your muscle. You need your muscles to be strong for a fight, but you need to work your breath work for the times of panic or stress response because it needs to be an active tool in your tool belt. And you need to have also the proactive drive of getting you into that parasympathetic reset. So that can be done prior to going to school or at the lunch table, even if you need to go into a bathroom stall and sit with your feet on the floor and do a couple cycles because that's the place where you feel safest to do so. Breath is just one of the best ways to harness that autonomic nervous system. And then, of course, diet and food as medicine play a huge role. I don't want to scapegoat over that, but just to kind of keep on lifestyle, light, as you mentioned earlier, getting right on your circadian rhythm and getting access to sunrise and sunset, so important for rewiring biological balance in the body and that beautiful infrared light that we see, that's God's red light. That's so anti-inflammatory as it looks that awe factor that we get. We see neurological benefits of witnessing sunset for certain. I think that's extremely important. Getting outside for at least an hour per day, which is sad that that's difficult for some. I really strive for 2 hours a day. And so that might mean anchoring activities with your child. We have out here like a tree weave kind of net, which is like a rebounder. It's woven between our trees. And so it's like a playscape, but it has like a trampoline type of functionality for it. Rebounding in addition to outside is another really great way. Anytime you can get your G-force activated, jumping down 2 stairs to the ground, those types of G-force recalibration changes really favorable for vagus nerve. And I'm sure you've shared a lot of tips of, vagus nerve regulation with neck movements, gaze, etc. Gargling salt water is one of my favorites as well. I think it's a great ritual for people during cold, flu, and viral season. Salt can, of course, reduce microbial activity. And also when we are doing that gargling, it's working like a tuning fork for our vagus nerve. And so that vibration that we're provoking with that gargle allows a deep relaxation and pushes us into that parasympathetic. And sometimes things resonate that are more proactive like that, to like check off a box. Do this, versus the okay, just journal and find peace and pray. And all these things are all important. But you just sometimes give some marching orders. Well,
and then that's where we keep going with this, because there is just a level of this, and I'm such a glasses half full guy. I don't love to say the word bad, severe, significant. I always have to, kind of like balance them out. Just, that's the way I'm wired, but we're up against it. And so what about your kiddos and families who literally come in and they say, we have done all that? Like, what's the last, because there's regulation, and oftentimes there's just this reset that needs to occur first. There's just repair. I have this love-loathe relationship with the word repair, because I never ever want our patients to feel like we are doing the repair. Like there's some outside in, whether it's adjustment or a supplement or whatever it could be, like the healing is on the inside. That is literally how God designed it. But sometimes this cycle, this loop, this nervous system is so broken, you have to take a repair approach. Have you run into those patients where they're like, I can't get my kiddo to do any breath work. I can't get them to it just seems like we're going to continue to run into a wall. What else is left on the list, if there is anything for you on that front?
Well, I think one of the things as parents you can do for sure, and yes, in the repair and recovery mode, it is, I think targeted nutritional supplements are extremely valuable. So, I called out vitamin C, I called out adrenal glandular, B6, magnesium bisglycinate is amazing because that actually can cross the blood-brain barrier as well of all forms of magnesium, and it can downregulate the stimulus of ACTH from the pituitary. So it kind of works like a bodyguard to prevent that cortisol stimulus. So I'm a huge fan of magnesium bisglycinate, and then not to mention how it supports the neuromuscular release from tension and locking. I think touch is really important with these kiddos as well. And again, everything's a dial, right? It's not a, I always use this analogy of like, with anything, any type of approach of treatment, or just if you're someone listening and you just want to optimize your metabolism, anywhere along the line, there's never this like light switch of on or off where you're just going to fall off a cliff. It's a dimmer switch, if you will. And it's always this continuum of how do I make food as medicine more amplified in my life? And then in some of these spaces, it's how can we tone down some of these things? So for some of these kids that are like jacked and addicted to video games, we work with literally concepts of timers, concepts of you get a GABA calm in the last 2 minutes because that prevents the outrage that occurs conditionally when we turn off the system. So we're going to give your body biological support. We're going to also give you the verbal warning, the time cue. There's just, it just depends, so situational, right? If we're talking about breath work, it could be a child laying on the floor, and if they're not into it, you need to put something for them to blow, like a feather on the ground. And they need to just start with laying on the ground with their chin on the ground and moving the feather across the room. And it's like, okay, now I know what my breath does, and I've seen what can happen. We can use breathing balls, like those expansive and contracting balls that they use in science museums, kinetic wise. And so I think for the parent, my argument, and unfortunately to just be kind of harsh on that, is that likely they haven't done it all. Likely they're struggling and hitting some pinpoints or roadblocks, and the how they're doing it might be mechanistic and not as deeply connected or experiential for either the child or the parent, or there's a energetic disconnect there. Or I notice all the time with supplementation, oh yeah, we've done that. And it's like, well, then I look at the formula and I'm like, well, you're taking 1/6 of the dosage that would be efficacious in this condition. So just taking, there is 40 milligrams of vitamin C in your multi, but I want you to take 1,200 milligrams to be efficacious for this 60-pound kiddo.
You have to pack enough punch to hit reset. So,
I guess I hate to, I don't know where you anticipated me going with that, but I think my big thing would be is if I've heard they've done it all, I would step back and recalibrate and try to understand how they're doing and what they're doing and what areas are being done to the level that I believe is appropriate or necessary. And then the ones that aren't really happening or didn't work, we need to troubleshoot why. And maybe just to segue, that's the same way that I approach optimal eating for kids. I hear time and time again with food jags, my kid won't eat that. My kid won't eat that. My kid doesn't like this. Have you actually sat down and asked them why? And have you had a conversation? I'm telling you, 2- and 3-year-olds have the wherewithal to have a conversation with you about why they don't like something and not just use the word yucky. You can talk about the color. You can talk about the texture. Was it slimy or was it squishy? Was it too firm and crunchy? Was it right? We need to understand the why and then have a conversation with them actually to empower them on why it's important and why we want them to try it again and support them to be a taste adventurer, right? And with that, we're bringing them to the table to create a partnership of nourishment. It's not a, you need to do this plate club of the 70s or 80s. It's also, though, not a millennial or plus parent who says, oh, I don't want to create any disordered eating, so my kid just eats what they eat.
You got to find that sweet spot.
Yes. I'm super tight on protein, and I believe very strongly it is the parent's job to ensure that their child is nourished and eating ample protein grams to fuel their body's growth and development.
Everything starts there. If the ebook kids are listening to you right now, Allie, they'd be like, oh no, Dad found another one to play the protein track for us all the time.
Baby. Did you eat your meat?
Yep, let's go. Meat first. even down to the sequence, because we're obsessed with sequence. Awesome. Which is that. So the reason I added that question, and I don't get to ask it to everybody, because not everybody's a practitioner. Some people are, in a great way, by the way, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Some people put information out, but they don't necessarily have these one-on-one cases. And when you are a practitioner, you learn more than a researcher, content creator only, because you run into tough cases. And it's the tough cases that give you the greatest answers that apply not only to that individual case, but then you learn from it and go, oh, I can see this coming better. I can see this relate to others. And so the top 2 episodes that we have downloaded so far on the Experience Miracles podcast, and we're only 50 in, and my adrenals are still hanging in. So we're going to make it. Okay. Yeah. And I'm going to get some gab and chew, because you could probably tell from me, because you're an expert in this, me writing, I am the most chill. My family's always like, you are so happy. You're so in the flow state. Me on a video, or I'm a raging bull. I come out guns and blazes. So I learned many things from you today, my friend, but that's a tip for me. So you have these cases. The top 2 by far downloaded episodes were When You've Done It All. I think it was titled When Nothing Works. When you've tried every single, intervention, even on the natural holistic fence, and your kiddo's still stuck in this stress cycle. And that's my specialty. Is we make a joke with our practice, we should answer the phone, welcome to the last resort. And that was always a joke kind of medically. Now, I used to see patients who had 3, 4, 5, 8 medications. Now I see patients who have, just pages and pages of supplements and vitamins and hyperbaric oxygenation, and they're still missing this magic unlock. So that's where I'm kind of going here. And then you look at it and go, okay, and you said it. You were right on it. There's a physical touch, neuromuscular reset conversation that I think is really missing from the adrenal lexicon, because the way God designed us is the one. In chiropractic, we would separate, they kind of teach us this way. There's the somatic system. So there's structure and muscles and skeletal, and the nervous system runs through that somatic system, and the nervous system very much harmonizes and organizes the somatic system. So you would think of chiropractic, most people listening, you would put chiropractic almost kind of purely in a somatic system. But the somatic system and the visceral system, so your organs, your glands, they are very much run by this nervous system as well, with the vagus nerve being, the most popular one we could put into this, and the sympathetic nervous system. And what happens with the adrenals, and Allie, I had a chiropractor teach this to me, but it was a chiropractor who loved practice, which is awesome, but he didn't love science. So I would ask these very neuroscience answers, like you and I. We love DHA and, amygdala, and we could go on, and this person didn't. So I never got a good answer. So the adrenals are the one gland that, and this was a long time ago, so pardon the analogy, he said when they go into just this cycle of absolute stress and then eventually into fatigue, it's like a CD that gets a scratch on it, and every time you come around, and I know people who only have podcasts and MP3s are like, what the heck is a CD? But it just constantly gets jammed up there. And it will physically, so the nervous system, because the adrenals need to operate with such speed to physically, neuromuscularly prepare the body for fight or flight. This is how God designed it. The adrenals are the one gland who can kick a neurological sensory message across the dorsal horn into the muscles and into the diaphragm. So what we find all the time in our most adrenal, wound up, yes, but worn out and insufficient patients, they have a severe, what's called subluxation, neuromuscular tension, asymmetry, and fixation from about T7, so that lower thoracic region, to about T10, which is the direct viscerosomatic interplay nervous system communication between the adrenals. And I find everybody would think, if we adjust upper cervical, vagus nerve, brainstem, calming, the kids and adults whose nervous systems are most stuck in this stress loop, they need that physical adjustment to hit reset to the biomechanical, or what I always draw this out on a whiteboard, the viscerosomatic reflex of the adrenals. And then that's breath, because the next door neighbor to the adrenals neurologically is the diaphragm. And so what I find all the time is our patients, once these adrenals and the nervous system goes down this loop we've talked about this whole time, physically they start to breathe literally in their neck. They start to breathe into their traps and into their upper thoracics. And so what we do is we've created this clinical protocol of adjustments. So we call neurotonal release to reset adjustments. You actually have to clear tension from their traps and clavicle and shoulders because they will literally become deoxygenated. They are. They're very, like, we'll measure pulse ox and HRV on our patients, and they are completely deoxygenated. And I'll finish this science loop with a story of a kiddo that just happened. And you got to clear the tension from their shoulders and their upper thoracics to almost open up the bandwidth to get into their lower thoracics. The moment you make these physical chiropractic resets into that axis, you can't see the adrenals, but it's like you can see the adrenals themselves. Take a deep breath, get back online. And now, I know, pun intended there, but, and now you can, all these things that this family was trying to get in, they get in, and you create, my favorite thing in clinical practice, you create momentum for that patient when momentum had been against that patient, right? Because they were stuck in this cycle and in this loop. And so, Gavin, I'll leave you with a story on this, and then tell me, I want to know what your brilliant brain hears and knows when you hear me kind of give that reset, and we can kind of close it out with that. So this kiddo, Gavin, comes from Canada a couple weeks ago, 10 days ago. It's Wednesday, so he started 9 days ago. And I had the conversation just right. Mom and Dad were already ready. He's on 3 different medications when he starts. And we just had a conversation. I stayed within my scope of practice, as I do on this podcast. I'll walk right up to the line, maybe put my chubby little pinky toe over it a little bit, and then stay, right? And so parents already knew, like, to get my child to heal, we've got to get to the other side of not only their stress and their perfect storm, but these medications. So I said, that I can't help with. But if that is your goal tonight, call the practitioner who put him on this and find a plan to get him off. And these parents are just rock stars. So within 48 hours, which is, I don't think how everybody does it, but this family and this doctor did, they got him off all 3 medications. So we get from Monday to Wednesday, and I'm adjusting this kid twice, right? That's how our intensive programs work. Sorry for the long story, but I think there's just a ton out of this. And so we're adjusting this kid who is anxiety, ADHD, and now depression. He has hit depletion, right? He has hit that stage where he's just shut down. Physically, when you meet him, his tension, you do not need to be a chiropractor. You don't need to be anything. You can see it stuck from his diaphragm up. His traps are stuck to his ears, and he is simultaneously physically and emotionally and physiologically wound up and then worn out. And I know you're listening to podcasts, everybody, but kind of imagine my shoulders stuck to my ears there. So we're working away at that. We're clearing that tension from the top to the bottom with the entire stinking goal, Allie, of I got to get to this kid's diaphragm and I got to get to this kid's adrenals as fast as I can and hit reset. And so obviously I thought we were going to be in for a storm coming off of 3 medications, starting something brand new, an intensive program while we're trying for medications. Coming in, prior to coming into the studio here to do this podcast, I saw him this morning. You've never, and this was me, my story, won't surprise anybody, was 20 years of ADHD, not sleeping, not regulating, right? Thank God I was a farm kid because I could get it out. But, and so Gavin is just really near and dear to me in my heart. And the smile on this kid's, if you didn't know what was going on, he's sitting in the middle of our community area, the practice, and his shoulders are down. He's taking deep breaths. He can now regulate. And his smile is like plastered all around his head. I don't even know how to describe it other than you're just like, this kid's like, I'm back, And so, holy cow, long Tony story there, my friend. I apologize for that. But there was a physical reset, last cheat code that this kid needed. Now, this family's awesome. They're ready to move to the farm, right? They're ready to get their kiddo healing. But I was going to say, I think, Allie, but I know that for so many kiddos they've gotten, and parents, if you've gotten that far down the road that you just can't seem to hit reset naturally, get into a neurologically focused chiropractic office. It is not that one thing all by itself. is not going to do the whole job of healing, but it might be the unearthing first move you need to do first to open up the channels from breath to adrenals to physiology to everything else. I just see it all day long in my practice, which is why I go so deep down that road. So adrenal, visceral, somatic reset. What do you hear? What do you see with that? What do you learn from that? I guess I would almost ask.
It's interesting because when you said the kind of blockages and the locking that comes upbound, I think that's why I see so much positive impact from just gargling salt water, which again, because again, you're opening that, right? And so from the inside out, you're able to create like this vortex churn of energy, but you're also opening and activating the chest and the throat. And I will tell you, often individuals will say, and this has happened to me for sure, when I know I'm in a state of dysregulation and I've over pushed my, deadline, timeline, whatever. I've over pushed myself, taken on too much, etc. The first thing I notice is tension in my throat. Right. And so it's like I think that's a really interesting connection there, that I never directly connected to the adrenals, but upon hearing that, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what that is. And I think that's so common that we'll hear that. It's not a sore throat, Allie. It's like my throat is being strangled, or like my throat is being hugged, or, and people more commonly speak about, the elephant on their chest, or that tension that we experience more thoracically. But I think that all of that is very connected, and like you said, I'm not sure the mechanistic influence of why that happens, but I definitely agree that getting release in that area would help both with circulatory flow to the adrenals, and also I think just, again, I really nerded out this past spring. I did a presentation at a buffalo ranch out here, Rome Ranch. It's an awesome regenerative farm. And they do a conference called What Good Shall I Do? And I spoke on glyphosate, I spoke on EMF, and I spoke on microplastics. Basically, like, what are the top 3 insults in industrialized living, and how do we mitigate or offset them? What is food as medicine and lifestyle approaches, et cetera. But the EMF thing, I myself went way down the rabbit hole. And as we started this conversation, I said, hey, I'm out here in 3G world, so it might not be the best audio. Intentionally, we're out here on 15 acres, and we have our rain barrel and our well. And I really work hard to try to prevent hijacking of my nervous system. And I think that is such a silent killer. I mean, I read Robert O. Beck's book, The Body Electric. Yes, ma'am. And that blew my mind about the piezoelectric conductivity of the body. And I mean, I knew it from the bad season. I knew that 6-foot thing, and I could feel it deep as a practitioner and just as a being. But I think that the energetic connection, it can be just as, and still we're just tapping into it, right? We can talk somatic, we can talk systems, we can talk circulatory flow, oxygen, the things that are more tangible that we get. Right. But I think the energy connection that you can tap into by those redirections and releases of locking in the body is probably the biggest factor. I would honestly, I'd put, we continue to use the word foundational and essential. So, when we get done, I fly to Orlando here this week, an incredible conference that you would love, they would love you, they would learn so much from you, Documenting Hope. It's an organization for kids' health, and they originally, Epidemic Answers is the first one, they're both great names. Epidemic Answers is just this woman, they're incredible, right? And it's a bunch of rock star doctors and parents who've healed their kiddos from all the stuff they weren't supposed to be able to, and right in this conversation. And now they've started a research and conference arm called Documenting Hope, which means what it says. They absolutely know kids can heal, and they're going to and are documenting the journey. So I'll give you a brief because I know where we are. I know where we are. But they did a CHIRP study, which I can never remember what the heck CHIRP stands for, Allie, but I do remember this study. And I'll get to see the updated presentation this year. It's very analogous to my perfect storm concept. Toxic. They go more with what they call the toxic load or allostatic load theory, right? Like this all gets in, and then everything we talked about. And so they do this 1,500
questionnaire to parents of kids who've had these chronic illnesses, and they're doing everything we're doing here with the finest detail I've ever seen in a questionnaire. And so they presented the early findings, and they put more kids in the study, so they'll have updated findings this year. When the presenter was going through last year, I was surprised by none but one, because the top 10, Al butchered. I can't remember exactly which one was in the ranking, and they need to get a lot more in there to kind of aggregate the data, right? So the number one thing was maternal distress. Okay, that was so stress during pregnancy. So stress hormones, stress cycle, everything you and I talk about 24/7. It's that, everybody listening, it's that from the very beginning of conception on. That's why it's a big deal, because the nervous system and the whole physiological system literally only knows that, because that's what's called the sensitive critical periods. I've covered that on the podcast big time. Then you had the other stuff. You had environmental exposures, right? Environmental pollutants, right? And those sort of things. And then you had antibiotics. I was not surprised to see antibiotics in the first 5, right? You had something that starts with the letter V, right? That is a pollutant and a toxin, and it was in there. Not surprised to see that. EMF took spot number 3. Spot number 3. And I just hadn't done my homework yet. You know what I mean? I knew enough that I moved to the country. Same thing as you said. Like, we live on 20 acres. We use it for when we need to do a podcast or anything. Like, I actually shut mine off at night. Like, we put a little timer on there, literally even just shut them off at night, you know, and everything else. So it blew my mind how much of a toxin and a pollutant, and the E, and now I'm like, well, duh, Tony, you're an expert in the nervous system, and it's an electrical system, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're burdening, you know, our neuroelectric systems by being exposed to that all the time. But I guess I was surprised how high up the list it was. I wasn't going to be surprised that it's on the list, but that it was such a factor. And so, like, if a baby's, here's what they mapped it out. If your baby's crib is right by the fuse box, right by the fuse panel, or around the outlets, right, the level of it, because these different electrical circuitries go at different wavelengths and levels of the house even. So I can't wait to I'll report more next week. I'm going back down to present and hang out, but it's awesome. Okay. Can
I speak to that in a second?
Please do.
So in what I've recently learned in preparation for that talk, because I always anchor things back to the perfect design of human and God, and I look at eating God food. You know, was it manufactured in a factory, or did God create it? Did it have a mother? Was it growing? Can you imagine all of its edible parts intact, et cetera, right? And I think of that also with the world of EMF. So there's the reduction of the stimulus, move away as far as you can from the towers, try to, use the kill switch in the evening, be mindful of all of these, various ways to kind of mitigate and reduce. And then there's all of the input, and I'm always a little bit hesitant to like the biohacking industry. I think it's very interesting, and in an extreme, or I won't even say extreme, in a dysautonomic case, I think some of these, like now there's a lot of vagus nerve vibration, TENS units, these types of things, right? I just believe very strong, and I think those can be used and are necessary, to be clear. I think that these can be necessary to give electrical stimulus, electrical reset. With that being said, I think that God has such a perfect natural design that we can't even tap into trying to understand that. When we look at the Schumann resonance, when we look at hertz of the earth, when we look at why we feel calm when birds are chirping, there's such a holistic connection to us being in this gravitational force of the earth as human beings with various living beings that all have their own vibrational frequencies, and there's a harmonious element to it. And I think that connecting into it versus trying to biohack or trick or get it back through adding and adding and adding, it can be a wrong turn. So I just want to note that, like, again, I think that, some of these things can be very helpful for the short term, but you have to find the perfect delivery that God created for us as the best way to be holistic, or to have the best resilience and true balance for the human being.
Nailed it. Well, let me take us home with an accolade and a thank you, a joke, and then one final question. Okay, you ready for this? This is not on the sheet. This is not prepared. Okay, number one, Man, I've been blessed to be in this natural health world and meet the Josh Axes and Jordan Rubins and, RFK Juniors. It's wild. I'll never make sense of how God has put me so awesomely into this seat to just meet some incredible people. So I knew when Lindsay introduced us that I would love you majorly, but my goodness, the time has flown by. I'm having a blast. You are brilliant. I love you. I know we're meeting through Riverside Podcast Studio for the first time, but thank you. Love you like crazy. Cannot wait to meet you in person one time and I just continue to serve humanity and families together. And I want to come back to that because what you're doing with Naturally Nourished Kids, my team and I, so I want you to be able to close with that. But first, a joke. Okay, this is important. So it's story joke. Okay, those that have listened to the podcast, they know we're not going a whole hour without some random farmer joke from Tony. Okay, this is how we reset our nervous systems right here with some humor. So birds chirping, Allie. Even though I'm a farm kid, nothing would cause my sympathetic nervous system and adrenals to go into fight or flight and sheer terror like birds chirping, because I am terrified of birds, okay? Now, I shouldn't just leave that as a rando fact. I should explain it. When you are a farm kid, true farm kid, right now, I live on a holistic, hippie Instagram farm, okay? That is my farm. My farm loses money. There's nothing actually. So I grew up on a GMO antibiotic-laced make money farm.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
So when you are the youngest child and your dad's right-hand man and best friend, and your dad's been at it for a long time, he takes his kid and he says, you do all the jobs that suck the most. So in the spring, when all of your farm equipment has been put into barns and machine sheds and into storage, birds know that it's cold outside in winter, and they go into, now you're nodding, you know where I'm going with this. So you go into a shed and you get all this equipment up and running, and you have to disrupt a few or a lot of bird nests. Bird moms don't like said short, chubby kid with curly hair disruptor coming into the barn and doing that. Nobody on earth has been dive bombed by barn swallows more than me, Tony Ebel. And so the moment that a bird chirps, my nervous system, nerves that fire together, wire together through the adrenal HPA axis, my nervous system goes, I'm about to die. And so my kids know this, Allie, and they make fun of me. Most people on my team know this. So to regulate my nervous system, when I'm out mowing and then the birds come out, I'm like, there goes my peace. And I also can't fly away from them, so I think it's a pretty logical fear because they can do things I can't do. And so there's that joke through that story about birds and how my vagus nerve might respond differently than the average human's vagus nerve to birds with some reasoning. So can you tell us what's coming up next for you guys? Especially this is a pediatric. We love our audience. We're doing more content than ever about parent health, adrenal, and our own well-being, because we can't get our kids to heal if we don't heal alongside of them. Right. And sometimes we need to often need to lead the healing charge. But you're coming there. You already are, but you're doing even more next with Naturally Nourished Kids. So what do we need to know? What does our tribe need to know to tap into your community and your awesomeness? What's there now and what's coming up next?
Well, thank you. So it's been a really fun conversation, and I've appreciated it. So I agree wholeheartedly that the mother and father of the household are the battery or the generators of the nervous system of the household. And so it absolutely matters that mom and dad are grounded, balanced, if we expect healthy and well children, for sure. Naturally Nourished Kids comes out in fall of 25. So we're hoping for September. It could be early October. We completed the manuscript and sent that in just this month, November 1st. And it's been a project that really, Becky was pregnant in 2020. And so we were walking around my neighborhood, and I think my daughter was 4 at the time. And I said, I put out Anti-Anxiety Diet in 2017. Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook in 2019, and our secondary part of the book tour got canceled because of the bad season. And so we were walking around the neighborhood, and I was like, what's really next? And I'm looking at pregnant Becky, and I'm like, I think we really have to do Naturally Nourished Kids. And I said, we should do it together. I think that you're going to, and now she has a 2 and a 4-year-old. So Noah, who she was pregnant with in 2020, I was like, I think that she had a beautiful home birth. I had a traumatic hospital birth. I said, we really, when I look through the lens of you as a mama and how I just really enjoy the partnership we have and the family relationships we have, I really think we could do this as a really cool collaboration project. So it is a guidebook for your household that literally will give you confidence in the times of confusion of how to nourish your children. Initially on concept, it was actually going to be called Low Carb Kids because of the importance of the role of ketones, as we've talked about earlier, and getting children off that blood sugar roller coaster and back into a lower glycemic relationship with their blood sugar. But we found that can come off a little diety. It might not be as wide scope accepted. And the concept of naturally nourished kids is more about how can we deeply nourish our children. Of course, we emphasize a low glycemic diet. There's an entire chapter devoted to blood sugar balance. I wrote all of the copy content and she did all the photography. And then we 50-50 split the recipes. So there's 100+ recipes that are all low glycemic. We have icons in the recipes, whether it's gut supporting, anything from, I mean, we have like dirt cups, old school dirt cups. And we made them with avocado chocolate mousse and gelatin gummy worms. So they're getting gut restoring gelatin, and we're using, tart cherry juice for the red ones, or we're using lemon zest and a little bit of our Bio C Plus to boost the vitamin C in there. There's these cocoa chia balls that we break down as the dirt, if you will, which uses almonds and dates and cacao powder and cacao nibs. And it's just a really fun, approachable way that I think for those that are maybe not your listeners, but just the wide stream American household, there's accessibility to the food as medicine through the fun and engaging and delicious recipes. And then each recipe will have a food as medicine focus, which really takes things next level, identifying the ingredients and why they are healing to the body, or the replaced ingredients and why we chose not to include the standard if it's a redo type of a recipe. And then, like I said, that intro content that I put together really serves as a guidebook for your household of how to nourish your children. And we take you all the way from what we call savory starts with baby-led weaning, all the way through making healthy hip for your teenagers and really leading them into that autonomy and ownership. There's a lot about being a taste adventurer, breaking food jags, just real talk about navigating being a mom in a place where, and dad, it's not specific to moms, but being a parent in today's world where ultra processed foods are just bombarding our children everywhere you look, from the soccer field to the classroom, etc. And so there's just a little bit of shock and awe. I don't like too much of that like food babe vibe of like, this is going to kill you, this is going to kill you, we need to boycott. I think it's more about pivoting. I energetically just feel better to pivot and do different. But we do, of course, include some information on, why we're here, what grass law is, what is subsidized in American food culture, and why a single ingredient apple is more expensive than a gummy by Welch's. And so I think it explains a lot of the why and how we got here. It describes the epidemics that we're seeing in children, from obesity to diabetes to fatty liver to neurological issues, you name it, food allergies, respiratory stress. And it provides a solution. And I think, again, the whole goal that you can literally read in our Mastering Your Macros section, oh, this is why protein's important. This is based on my child's weight, how many grams of protein they need per day, and how I can make that a reality. And I think that type of information has not been provided to parents yet. And I even identify in that section, here's the APA guidelines, here's the naturally nourished guidelines.
It has the
APA guideline, and I think it's important to do so because the APA guidelines clearly aren't working.
Yeah, it hasn't. And that takes us back to the beginning when I made the introduction, because my brain fell in love with all your content. And then I'm already looking at what's coming with Naturally Nourished Kids, which is obviously so I forgot to even kind of go into, the stuff from before. I was asking you about a future project as your historical question, because that's what I'm picking up on. And that's what I was so excited. What you guys do so well is you do explain the why. You know, it's not just here's what to do, here's what to make. That's all out there. But it's like, well, why? What can I learn from this? And I know that may sound, you know, kind of cliche for me to bring that up because I love learning so much myself. But like, you can't make that pivot. You can't make that transformation with your family only knowing the what not to do list and the what to do list. Why? You know, what's the reasoning behind this? And then give it to me real without, I love that you said that, without the shock and awe. Don't make it, you know, overly dramatic for the sake of that. And also don't, you know, shy away from the truth as well. And I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say here in closing, but we take in a lot of content, and I have for 20 years. You know, I've been a dad for 17 years and a practitioner for 17 years, go back to school. I've been studying this for 20 years. Like, I've become choosy, I guess I would say, with who I enjoy learning from, right? They have to kind of hit all these checkpoints to say, is this usable? Like you said there at the end, like, it's the solution and it's practical. And so your guys' content, and then what's coming here with both of you working on this incredible project is going to be that as well. So everybody listening, this is one of those episodes, absolutely positively hit the show notes, hit the links, go to the websites, go to the Instagram, get a hold of the books that are already there. Be the first one to know next fall when Naturally Nourished Kids comes out. And just get with these rock stars. You know, we are trying to build a community. You know, that's a big goal of ours with PX Talks, is to say God didn't call us to be everything to everyone. You know, I'm gonna know my expertise and how we can help kiddos in that way. And then I've done it locally to build the practice. You know, when it comes to nourishment and nutrition and everything else, I know what I know to enter the conversation, and then I say, here's the expert. Here's who you need to go to get that from. And we're going to work in harmony and coordination to get your family healthy. And we're doing that with the podcast. We're doing that with the PX Talks network of saying, who can we trust who's in alignment with us about how God designed us to be healthy, to experience. You know what a miracle really is? Just life. You know, on our platform, it probably looks like the miracles are the kids who weren't talking and now are, the kids who are having seizures and now aren't, Gavin who was on meds and aren't, and those are miracles. But they're easier to click into because they went into a struggle and then came out of it with this stuff. You don't have to be in a struggle to get the most out of this stuff. The miracles that are hard to publish and get, you know, PR on, or whatever the heck I'm trying to say, are the ones that never went through the storm. You know, and just live that life. That's the goal. So rant number 17 over. And Allie, you're incredible. I hope we can have you back again and jam on this podcast. I am sure God will put things in motion for conferences and other content and everything else. And anything we can ever do to serve you and your community, you just ask. We love you. We're so appreciative of you. And thanks for joining us.